Hey everybody, Dr. Phil here. Hope everybody's doing well. This is going to be a somewhat brief video on ethics, corporate social responsibility, environmental sustainability, and a little bit about strategy. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So let's first talk about linking strategy, ethics, and social responsibility. So in crafting and executing a strategy that delivers value to both customers and shareholders, the question becomes, what is a firm's duty? Because you could kind of see that some of those might be competing responsibilities. Maybe they, somewhat go hand in hand, but maybe it's hard to deliver value to both customers and shareholders because customers want a cheap price, shareholders want to generally maximize their return. Well, some things that a firm can do, and obviously this is not an exhaustive list, is act in an ethical manner. The optics of not doing that are usually very costly. Be a committed corporate citizen and allocate some of its resources to improving the well-being of employees, suppliers, and the communities in which it operates. Firms are usually very good at publicizing that. And also adopt business practices that conserve natural resources, protect the interests of future generations, and preserve the well-being of the planet. So, core concept. What do we mean by business ethics? So, this is the application of ethical principles and standards to the actions and decisions of business organizations and the conduct of their personnel. It's essential for organizations to frequently discuss and publicize ethical expectations for workplace behavior and managerial decision making to try to avoid moral disengagement. Firms want to be seen as being ethical, right? Because it's never bad for business. So the question becomes, speaking of business, how do ethics and business ethics differ? Well, ethical principles are not materially different from ethical principles in general. Business actions are generally judged by ethical standards of society, not subjective, not generally subjective to more permissive standards. So, what might lead to unethical business behavior? Well, the view that the business of business is actually business, not ethics, right? Just maximizing shareholder return with through a sort of very narrow lens, right? Nothing else is of importance. Faulty oversight, enabling the unscrupulous pursuit of personal gain and other selfish interests. We've certainly history is replete with those examples in the corporate world. Heavy pressures on managers to meet or beat performance targets, and also company culture that puts profitability and good business performance ahead of ethical behavior. And again, unfortunately, we've seen many examples of that. So let's talk about this idea of what we call ethical universalism. So this is sort of one of these core concepts. According to the school of ethical universalism, the same standards of what is ethical and what is unethical resonate with peoples of most societies, regardless of local traditions and cultural norms. So, for example, do not kill, for example, that's pretty much a norm around the world. Hence, common ethical standards can be used to judge employee conduct in a variety of country markets and indeed cultural circumstances. Now, let's talk about ethical relativism. So, according to the school of ethical relativism, different societal cultures and customs create divergent standards of right and wrong. Thus, what is ethical or unethical must be judged in the light of local customs and social mores and can vary from one culture or nation to another. So now, in comparison to the last one we just looked at, universalism, this one's saying, well, what's right in country A might be viewed as wrong or perhaps maybe morally or ethically questionable in country B. So now let's talk about the integrative social contracts theory. So according to this theory, universal ethical principles based on collective views of multiple cultures combine to form a social contract that all employees in all country markets have a duty to observe. Within the boundaries of this social contract, there is room for host country cultures to exert some influence in setting their own moral and ethical standards. However, first order universal ethical norms always take precedence over second order local ethical norms in circumstances where local ethical norms are more permissive, shall we say. So, there may be that bit of a contrast there. Maybe it's we sort of have to kind of weigh them against each other. Sometimes there may be a sort of a somewhat of a moral offsetting effect as well. So the Business Roundtable, which is comprised of the CEOs of the largest companies in the US, has stated that the purpose of corporations is to serve the interest of shareholders, that's the owners of the firm, while addressing the needs of stakeholders such as customers, employees, suppliers, and the communities in which they operate. So, you hear the term shareholders, you hear the term stakeholders, they sound almost the same. Shareholders are the people that basically fronted capital, they gave the company money to get the business started. In the primary market, of course, there are also people that invest in a firm later on. They just buy their shares from somebody else. That's called the secondary market. And then stakeholders, just think of like anybody as, if you're thinking of a stakeholder, anybody that would be affected in any way by the firm. So people that live locally, employees, suppliers, so on and so forth. Now, stakeholder capitalism argues that acting responsibly towards stakeholders and the environment is not only the right thing to do, but it's also good for the present and future of the business. Again, the optics of that are never bad, always good. Research has found that companies that excel in employee engagement and development, customer satisfaction, and social responsibility delivered shareholder returns greater than the S&P. That's the S&P 500, the Standard and Poor's 500. You can look that up. It's just think of it like almost like an index of pretty much the top companies around the world. So let's talk a couple more concepts for you. Corporate social responsibility. We sometimes abbreviate this CSR. This refers to a company's duty to operate in an honorable manner, provide good working conditions for employees, encourage workforce diversity, be a good steward of the environment, and actively work to better the quality of life in the local communities where it operates and in society at large. The corporate social responsibility strategy is usually defined by the specific combination of socially beneficial activities it opts to support with its contributions of time, money, and other resources. That could be charities, it could be, cleaning up like a local polluted river, it could be building a park for the local community, probably knowing that some of its employees, are there. Corporate social responsibility programs may include socially responsible business behavior, which means balancing shareholder interests with a duty to act as a good corporate citizen, considering how decisions may affect employees, communities, the environment, and society. So again, employees, communities, environment, you know, those are certainly examples of stakeholders. Striving to employ an ethical strategy and observe ethical principles in operating the business, and also actions to create a work environment that enhances the quality of life for employees, and then actions to provide equal opportunity in employment and build a workforce that's diverse with respect to race, national origin, sex, and other aspects that different people bring to the workplace. And what about environmental sustainability strategies? So, operating businesses to protect and enhance natural resources and ecological support systems to guard against outcomes that endanger the planet and to be sustainable for centuries. And this is, from a somewhat self-interested perspective too. Businesses have to think about that because if they basically screw up the areas in which they operate, then they may not be able to continue to operate in those areas. Sustainable business practices meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability, as I was saying, to meet the needs of the future. Now, in watching over management strategy formulation, strategy execution actions, a company's board of directors has four important corporate governance obligations to fulfill. First one is oversee the company's financial accounting and financial reporting practices. That's certainly a big one. That's a biggie. Number two, diligently critique and oversee the company's direction, strategy, and business approaches. Number three, evaluate the caliber of senior executive strategy formulation and strategy execution skills. And four, institute a compensation plan for top executives that rewards them for actions and results that serve shareholder interests. So it's sort of this we call it agency theory, and there's sort of that there's kind of almost a disconnect and a disalignment of goals sometimes between managers, and I define managers as basically the C-suite, the CEO, CFO, so on, CAO, so on and so forth, and the shareholders. The shareholders are basically employing the managers to run the firm for them because the shareholders are the owners. So this is what we call a principal agent relationship. So if that stuff interests you, like how do firms align, the principals versus the agents, so that they compensate and incentivize the managers, again, the C-suite, to act in the shareholders' best interests. You can look up what we call principal agency. Now, every corporation should have a strong, independent board of directors that is well informed about the company's performance, guides and judges the CEO, one of the top executives, has the courage to curb management actions it believes are inappropriate, unethical, or unduly risky, even if it's profitable, certifies to shareholders that the CEO is doing what the board expects, provides insight and advice to management, and ultimately is intensely involved in debating the pros and cons of key decisions and actions. So we kind of have this. There's a theory in management called like tone at the top. The idea is that if the top people are acting ethically, then that will sort of filter down the organization. They have to not only be seen to be acting ethically, they have to let me rephrase that. They have to not only act ethically, people below them have to see that, and that will sort of tend to filter down an organization. All right, thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you guys soon.